Trans woke the ancient void. Captain Sarah stared at the structure on her screens and felt her heart race. The thing floated in the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge, massive beyond anything humanity had ever built. It stretched across space like a spider's web made of light and metal, pulsing with energy that made her ship's sensors scream warnings. "Captain, the Concordance maps mark this entire region as forbidden," said from behind her. This voice carried that musical quality his species was known for, but right now it trembled with fear. "We should turn back." Sarah didn't look away from the viewport. Out here in the dead zone, stars were sparse and the darkness felt heavier somehow. The structure gleamed against that darkness like a promise or a threat. "We came all this way to investigate an anomaly. That's exactly what we're doing." Her crew of 47 humans worked their stations with practiced efficiency. The research vessel Prometheus wasn't designed for combat, but it carried the best scanning equipment the Terran Alliance could provide. They'd been mapping the galactic rim for 6 months when they detected the structure's energy signature. "Scans show the structure is at least 15,000 years old," said Dr. Herr. "Maybe older. The technology doesn't match anything in the Concordance database." "Because the database has been deliberately purged," said. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of extreme distress. "Please, Captain, the prohibition exists for a reason. My people have stories, old stories that parents tell children to frighten them. Stories about the silence that came before the Concordance, when whole civilizations vanished in the span of heartbeats." Sarah finally turned to face him, stood nearly 7 feet tall, his silver skin catching the bridge lights. He was a good officer and had become a friend during their mission, but he was also terrified, and that should have meant something. "Stories aren't evidence," she said, keeping her voice gentle. "We're scientists. We look at what's in front of us and we try to understand it." "That's what frightens me about your species," whispered. Sarah ordered the Prometheus forward. The ship glided through the darkness on ion drives, closing the distance to the ancient structure. As they approached, the sensors picked up more details. The web of metal and energy formed a sphere 3 light-years in diameter. Inside that sphere, something vast moved in the darkness. "Life signs," said Lieutenant from the tactical station. "Or something like life signs. The readings are strange, ma'am. Whatever's in there, it's big. Planet-sized, maybe bigger." "It's contained," said, studying her screens with intense focus. "This whole structure is a prison. Look at these energy patterns. They're designed to keep something in, not keep us out." The words hung in the air for a moment. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine but pushed it aside. Fear was natural. Acting on fear without understanding was foolish. "Take us closer," she ordered. "Launch probe teams. I want full spectrum analysis of that containment field." They worked for hours, launching drones and collecting data. The structure was a marvel of engineering. It drew power from the quantum foam itself, had redundant systems upon redundant systems, and appeared to be self-repairing. Whoever built it had meant for it to last forever. "The power output is declining," reported. "Has been for centuries, maybe longer. Some of the systems are failing." "Can we repair them?" Sarah asked. Made a sound like wind through broken glass. "You can't be serious." "If this is a prison and it's failing, then whatever's inside might escape anyway," Sarah said. "We could prevent that." Before could respond, alarms screamed across the bridge. Lieutenant called out, "Solar flare." A big one coming from that dead star system at coordinates. The wave of radiation hit the structure before could finish. The ancient metal flickered. Energy patterns stuttered and reformed. Deep inside the sphere, something moved with sudden purpose. "The containment field is destabilizing," shouted. "The flare disrupted some kind of balance in the power systems. Captain, we need to." Light erupted from the structure. Not normal light, but something that hurt to look at, something that made Sarah's eyes water and her mind rebel. The thing inside the prison was waking up. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds in hundreds of systems, ancient beacons activated. They'd sat dormant for 12,000 years, their purpose forgotten, their warnings eroded to mythology. Now they screamed in dead languages, and even though no one could understand the words anymore, every species in the concordance felt dread settle into their bones. Sarah's emergency comm channel came alive with dozens of voices all at once. Prometheus, this is Concordance Central Command. Respond immediately. She accepted the connection. A hologram appeared on her bridge, showing the council chamber on Vex Prime. 50 different species sat in their viewing boxes, and every single one of them looked terrified. "Captain," said Elder, the current council speaker. His species looked like massive moths, and his wings were trembling. "What have you done?" "We were investigating an unknown structure," Sarah said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "There was a solar flare. It damaged the containment systems." "You were told that region was forbidden." His voice rose to a shriek. "The dead zone is prohibited for all concordant species. This prohibition has stood for 12,000 years." "You never said why," Sarah shot back. "You marked it as dangerous but provided no details, no evidence, no." "Because we destroyed all the records," another council member interrupted, a crystalline being whose voice came through as synthesized tones. "Our ancestors made a pact. The knowledge was too dangerous, the memory too terrible. They burned the archives and created the prohibition, hoping that ignorance would protect future generations." Spoke up, his voice hollow. "What is it? What did they contain?" The council members looked at each other. Finally spoke. "We only know fragments now, pieces that survived in religious texts and children's stories. 12,000 years ago, something came from beyond the galactic rim. The ancient races called it the Void Devourer. It consumed everything. Matter, energy, thought itself. 47 civilizations banded together to fight it. 23 of those civilizations were completely destroyed in the war. The survivors managed to weaken it barely, and constructed that prison using technology they could barely understand. Technology salvaged from extinct species and combined with their own. The cost was unspeakable," another council member added. "Entire star systems were sacrificed. Billions of beings died. And when it was over, the survivors were so traumatized that they chose to forget. They created the concordance from the ashes, dedicated to peace, and swore that no one would ever go near that prison again." Sarah felt the weight of those words. She looked at her crew and saw the horror on their faces. They'd been so confident, so sure that mystery existed only to be solved. Now they understood what their curiosity had cost. "We're evacuating the core world," said. "Preparing deep space shelters. We've been through this before. Some of us will survive." "That's it." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're just going to run and hide." "What else can we do?" His voice was weary beyond measure. "We barely won last time with 23 civilizations that no longer exist. We are fewer now, and it is just as strong. We will save who we can and hope that eventually it grows dormant again." Sarah looked at her screens. The structure was breaking apart now, piece by piece. The thing inside was visible, a darkness that seemed to consume the light around it. Even watching it on sensors made her feel cold. "No," she said quietly. Then louder, "No, we won't accept that." "Captain, we broke it, we'll fix it." Sarah cut the connection and turned to her crew. "Get me every piece of data we have on that entity. Contact Earth. Tell them to mobilize the fleet. And tell them," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "tell them we need everything. Every weapon, every ship, every soldier who's willing to fight." Lieutenant looked up from his station, his young face set with determination. "Ma'am, the Concordance has millions of ships. They have technology that's thousands of years ahead of ours. If they can't win—" "They've had peace for 12,000 years," Sarah interrupted. "They've forgotten how to fight. But humanity," she smiled, and it was not a gentle smile. "We've never stopped preparing for war. We've never forgotten that sometimes survival means being willing to do terrible things. Stared at her with all four eyes. You're insane. Your entire species is insane. Maybe, Sarah agreed. But we're the insane species that's going to save the galaxy, whether it wants us to or not. The Prometheus turned away from the breaking structure and accelerated toward human space. Behind them, the Void Devourer stretched and began to feed, consuming the nearby systems in darkness. The galaxy trembled and humanity prepared for war. The concordant species had built their civilizations on the foundation of survival. When news of the Void Devourer's awakening spread, they reacted with practiced efficiency born from ancient instinct. Evacuation protocols that hadn't been updated were dusted off and implemented. Refugee fleets launched from 1,000 worlds. The Great Library stations their databases and scattered them across the galaxy in hidden archives. Every species prepared to lose everything and hoped that something would survive. Humanity watched this preparation with growing frustration. Admiral stood in the command center on Mars, surrounded by holographic displays showing the galaxy-wide retreat. He was a big man, his hair gone gray from decades of service, and his hands were clenched behind his back as he studied the tactical situation. "They're not even trying to fight," he muttered. "Can you blame them?" asked General Sarah Kemp, standing beside him. "They tried once and barely survived. Why would they think this time would be different?" "Because we're here now," said. He gestured to one of the displays which showed Earth's response to the crisis. In the 3 weeks since Captain's message, humanity had mobilized forces that shocked even themselves. Every ship that could mount a weapon was being retrofitted. Factories that hadn't produced military hardware in decades were roaring back to life. The Terran Alliance was preparing for total war. "The Concordance thinks we're primitive," continued. "They look at our 800 years of compared to their 12,000 years of civilization and they see children. What they don't see is that we've spent those 800 years fighting. Each other, our environment, the universe itself. We've never known a time when violence wasn't an option." "That's not something to be proud of," Sarah said quietly. "No," agreed, "but it's something we can use." He pulled up classified files on the main display. Weapons programs that the Terran Alliance had developed in secret, ashamed of their own warlike nature, but unable to stop preparing for the worst. Planet cracker missiles that could shatter worlds. Quantum bombs that could tear holes in space itself. Self-replicating war machines that could consume entire fleets. Causality weapons that could kill something before it was born. "My God," Sarah breathed, "we built all this during peacetime." "We've never really been at peace," said. "We just pretended we were. Now we're going to use every terrible thing we've created to kill something that terrifies the entire galaxy." A new hologram appeared, showing Doctor from her research station. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the old records, the fragments the Concordance didn't destroy. I found something." "Go ahead, Doctor." "The ancient species didn't defeat the Void Devourer," said. "They couldn't. Every weapon they used, every bomb, every energy blast, it just fed the thing. It consumes energy, all forms of it. The more you attack it, the stronger it gets." Felt his blood run cold. Then how did they stop it? "They didn't stop it. They exhausted it through attrition. They threw civilization after civilization at it, let it consume them until it had eaten so much that it became sluggish, bloated. Then they built the prison around it while it was weakened. But Admiral, we don't have 23 civilizations to sacrifice. If we try to fight it the way they did, we'll lose. The galaxy will lose." "Then how do we kill it?" Was quiet for a moment. "We don't feed it, we starve it." She explained her theory, pulling up equations and energy models. The Void Devourer was sustained by consuming energy from the universe around it. If they could create a null field, an expanding sphere of space where energy couldn't exist, they might be able to drain the entity instead of feeding it. "The technology exists," said. We use micro-scale versions for our stealth ships to hide from sensors. If we could scale it up, make it big enough. We'd need to deploy generators at the entity's core, Sarah said, seeing where this was going. Inside the thing itself. Yes, confirmed. And whoever goes in won't be coming back out. The null field would drain the ship's power too. No engines, no life support. It would be a one-way trip. Studied the battle plan that was forming in his mind. It was insane. It was impossible. It would require sending ships and crews directly into the heart of an eldritch horror, through conditions that would break reality itself, with no hope of rescue or survival. "We'll need volunteers," he said. Within 6 hours of the announcement, 50,000 humans had volunteered. Fleet officers and civilian pilots, scientists and engineers, young soldiers fresh from training and veterans of the colony wars. They came from Earth and Mars, from the belt stations and the deep space colonies, from every corner of human civilization. Captain Sarah was among them. Her ship had been destroyed by a fragment of the braking prison and half her crew was dead, but she'd made it back to human space. Now she stood in the Admiral's office, her left arm in a medical cast, and demanded to lead the mission. "You've done enough," told her. "I started this," Sarah said. "I have to finish it." They assembled a fleet of 500 ships, fast attack craft modified to carry the null-field generators, supported by heavier vessels armed with humanity's most terrible weapons. Not to destroy the Void Devourer. That was impossible, but to carve a path through its defenses, to buy time for the generators to reach the core. The Concordants watched these preparations with a mixture of awe and horror. They'd expected humanity to evacuate like everyone else. Instead, the youngest species in the galaxy was preparing to fly directly into the mouth of the beast. Came to Earth 3 days before the fleet launched. He found Sarah in a simulator, running practice missions, teaching herself to navigate through impossible conditions. She'd aged in the weeks since they'd last spoken, or maybe she'd just stopped pretending to be young. "You don't have to do this," he said. Sarah climbed out of the simulator, sweating from the effort. "Yes, we do." "Why?" His voice broke. "Why are you so determined to die for species that aren't your own? We've treated you as primitives. We've looked down on you. Why would you sacrifice yourselves for us?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Because someone has to, and because, she struggled to find the words. Because we're human. We see something wrong and we try to fix it. We see someone in danger and we try to help. It's stupid and it gets us killed, and we do it anyway because the alternative is being the kind of species that watches the galaxy burn and does nothing. "You're insane," whispered, but there were tears on his silver cheeks. "Yeah," Sarah agreed, "we probably are." The fleet launched on a cold morning with Earth's sun rising over the Pacific. Sarah stood on the bridge of her new ship, the Prometheus II, and watched her home planet fall away. She didn't know if she'd ever see it again. None of them did. They jumped to FTL with 500 ships. The Concordants had sent observers, vessels that would record what happened for whatever future survived this crisis. As the human fleet accelerated toward the galactic rim, toward the growing darkness where the Void Devourer fed on system after system, those observers broadcast the sight across thousands of worlds. Species that had been preparing to flee stopped and watched. They saw humanity rushing toward certain death. They saw a species barely 800 years old challenging a horror that had destroyed civilizations that were millions of years ancient. And for the first time in 12,000 years, some of them wondered if perhaps there was another way to face the darkness. The human fleet jumped again and again, racing across the galaxy. Behind them, slowly, hesitantly, other ships began to follow. Not many, just a few hundred. Concordance vessels crewed by beings who had seen humanity's courage and felt ashamed of their own fear. They couldn't let the humans die alone. Sarah received the news that reinforcements were coming and smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. "See that," she said to her crew. "We're not insane, we're infectious." The fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the dead zone and saw what they were really facing. The Void Devourer had grown massive in the weeks since its awakening. It had consumed 17 star systems, and with each one it became larger, darker, more terrible. It existed partially outside normal space, and looking at it made Sarah's eyes hurt and her mind rebel against what she was seeing. "All ships," she broadcast. "This is Captain. Our mission is simple. We're going to fly into that thing, we're going to its core, and we're going to deploy the null field generators. Some of us won't make it. Most of us won't make it. But if even one ship reaches the center, we can stop this. We can save the galaxy." She paused, looking at the faces of her crew, then continued. "For thousands of years, the Concordance has known peace. They've built civilizations dedicated to knowledge and art and wonder. They've become better than us in almost every way. But they forgot one thing. They forgot that sometimes peace has to be defended. Sometimes survival means being willing to pay a terrible price. Well, that's what we're here for. That's what humanity does. We pay the price so others don't have to." The fleet formed up and accelerated toward the darkness. Sarah gripped her command chair and felt her heart hammer in her chest. She was terrified. She was probably going to die. But she was also human, and humans didn't run from the dark. They flew into it with their eyes wide open and their weapons blazing, and the galaxy watched and wept and hoped. Reality broke down as the human fleet penetrated deeper into the Void Devourer. Time became unreliable, flowing backward and forward in stutters. Crew members watched themselves die on their screens, saw futures that might be or might have been. Some went mad from the visions. Others simply turned off their view screens and flew by instruments alone, trusting numbers more than their own eyes. Sarah forced herself to keep watching. Her mind screamed at what she saw, but she needed to understand it. The thing they were fighting wasn't a creature in any normal sense. It existed across multiple dimensions, reaching through space like a hand through water. Where it touched, physics rewrote itself according to rules that shouldn't exist. "Prometheus II to all ships," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't look at it directly. Use your sensor overlays. Trust your instruments, not your eyes." Ships were dying around her. Fast attack craft vanished into pockets of twisted space where time accelerated until they aged to dust in seconds. Heavy cruisers fired their weapons only to watch the energy bolts curve back and strike them. The Void Devourer wasn't even trying to kill them. They were just too small to notice, like insects flying into a hurricane. But humanity had spent centuries exploring hostile environments. They'd learned to survive in the crushing depths of ocean trenches, in the frozen wastes of dead moons, in the burning radiation of stellar coronas. They treated cosmic horror as just another engineering problem. "Deploy countermeasures," Sarah ordered. "Scatter chaff, create false energy signatures, make ourselves too confusing to track." The fleet spread out, filling the space with decoys and noise. Some of it worked. The Void Devourer's attention, such as it was, diffused across thousands of false targets. Ships slipped through gaps in its awareness, cutting deeper toward the core. Doctor was on one of those ships, a research vessel called the Newton. She was studying the entity even as they flew through it, collecting data that would probably never be seen by anyone but herself, but couldn't help herself. Understanding was worth the cost. "Captain," she called over the comm, her voice tight with excitement and terror. "I'm seeing something. The entity, it's not evil, it's wounded." "What?" Sarah had to tear her attention away from piloting through a section where gravity pointed in 17 directions at once. "Look at these patterns," transmitted her data. "I've been comparing them to the ancient records. This thing, whatever it is, it was designed. It has a purpose. It's supposed to consume rogue dimensions, reality-breaking phenomena, things that threaten normal space. It's a caretaker species, or maybe a created tool. But 12,000 years ago, something went wrong." Sarah glanced at her tactical display. They'd lost 200 ships already, but the survivors were getting close to the core. What went wrong? "It ate something it shouldn't have. a parasitic intelligence, something that grew in the spaces between dimensions. The parasite infected it, drove it mad, turned it from protector into destroyer. The ancient species didn't defeat the void devourer. They contained it and the parasite together, trapped them both so the infection couldn't spread. "So we're not fighting a monster," Sarah said slowly. "We're fighting a sick patient." "Yes, and Captain, if we deploy the null field, we'll kill both of them, the devourer and the parasite. But the devourer is the only thing that can naturally regulate dimensional stability. Without it, reality itself might become unstable over the next few million years. We'd be trading one catastrophe for another." Sarah flew through a space where the laws of thermodynamics had reversed, and her ship was generating more heat than it could possibly produce. She felt the pressure of impossible decisions crushing down on her. "What's the alternative?" "Separate them," said. "In the microseconds before the null field fully activates, use causality weapons to cut the parasite away from the host. It would have to be perfectly timed, and the calculations are—" She trailed off. "Captain, I don't think it's possible. The margin of error is too small. We'd need to strike across 17 dimensions simultaneously with precision measured in quantum intervals." "Send me the calculations," Sarah ordered, "and prepare your null field generators. We're going to try." They broke through into the core region, where the Void Devourer's presence was most concentrated. Only 80 ships had survived the journey. Sarah could see them on her screens, scattered across space that folded in on itself like origami. The Concordance vessels that had followed them were here too, fewer than before, but still fighting. At the center of everything there was something that hurt to perceive. The parasite, wrapped around the dying consciousness of the devourer feeding on its pain, had been right. This wasn't evil. This was tragedy. "All ships, this is Captain." Sarah pulled up calculations and stared at them until they made sense. The timing would have to be perfect. Every ship firing at exactly the same moment, each one targeting a specific dimensional layer, coordinating an attack across realities that humans weren't meant to perceive. It was impossible. But then again, flying into the heart of an eldritch horror had been impossible too. "Listen carefully," Sarah continued. "I'm transmitting firing solutions. You're going to see targets that don't make sense, coordinates that shouldn't exist. Fire anyway. Trust the math. On my mark, everyone fires their causality weapons at precisely the same instant. Then we activate the null field generators and pray we got it right." "Captain," Lieutenant's voice was steady despite the fear behind it. "If we miss, we just feed energy to that thing. It'll become even stronger." "Then we don't miss," Sarah said simply. She counted down from 10. Around her, the bridge crew worked their stations with focused intensity. Outside, the universe was coming apart. Inside, humans did what they always did. They calculated, they planned, they prepared to attempt the impossible. 3, 2, 1 mark. 80 ships fired at the same instant. Causality weapons discharged, sending bullets backward through time to hit their targets before they were fired. The shots spread across dimensions, cutting through layers of reality that normal matter couldn't touch. For one perfect moment, synchronized by quantum entanglement and human stubbornness, the fleet struck as a single weapon. The parasite screamed, not in sound but in a way that made every living thing in the fleet feel agony in their souls. It thrashed, trying to hold onto its host, but the causality weapons had cut it free. For 1 microsecond, it existed separately from the devourer. "Now," Sarah shouted, "activate null fields." The generators came online. Spheres of absolute nothing expanded from each ship, spaces where energy could not exist. They overlapped, merged, grew into a massive void that began to drain everything around it. The parasite, cut free from its host, had nothing to anchor itself. It dissolved, screaming silently as the null field consumed it. But the void devourer, purified and freed, had just enough strength left to act. Sarah felt its presence in her mind, ancient and vast and profoundly grateful. It had been suffering for 12,000 years, aware but helpless, watching itself destroy the very things it was meant to protect. With its last strength, the Devourer reached out and stabilized the null field, prevented it from spreading beyond the intended radius. It saved the quantum foam around Earth, preserved humanity's ability to travel faster than light. Then, its purpose fulfilled and its pain ended. It dissolved into the cosmic background radiation and became one with the universe it had guarded for eons. The null field collapsed. Reality snapped back into normal shapes. Sarah blinked and saw stars again, real stars that didn't twist or burn with impossible colors. Her ship was dead in space, all power drained, but she was alive. Around her, other ships were beginning to broadcast survival signals. "Sound off," she called over emergency channels. "Who made it?" 3 ships. Out of 500, only 3 had survived. The Prometheus II, the Newton, and a Concordance heavy cruiser called the Eternal Vigil. Everyone else was gone. Sarah felt the weight of those losses settle onto her shoulders. 40,000 humans dead, hundreds more from other species, all to save a galaxy that had looked down on them, that had thought them primitive. But they'd done it. The Void Devourer was gone, the parasite was destroyed, the galaxy was safe. Rescue ships found them 3 days later. By then, the story of what happened had spread across every inhabited world. Humanity's sacrifice, the impossible victory, the moment when the youngest species had saved everyone else. The Concordance called an emergency council session. For the first time in their 12,000-year history, they invited a human to speak before the full assembly. Sarah stood in the great chamber on Vex Prime, her arms still in a cast, her uniform scorched and torn. "We didn't do this for glory," she told them. "We didn't do it to prove we're better than you. We did it because it needed doing and because we were in a position to try. That's all." Elder's wings were still now, calm instead of trembling. "You saved us all. How can we repay such a debt?" "You can't," Sarah said. "That's not how this works. We didn't create a debt, we just did what needed doing, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You can learn from it. You had 12,000 years of peace, and that's wonderful. But peace made you forget that sometimes the universe demands violence. Sometimes survival means being willing to pay terrible prices. You don't have to become warriors like us. But remember that courage matters. Remember that sacrifice matters. Remember that sometimes you have to face the darkness instead of running from it." The council was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, every species in the chamber rose to their feet, their tentacles, their wings, their crystalline structures. They stood in respect for the humans who had died and for the ones who survived. Later, they erected monuments on 1,000 worlds. They established the Terran protocols, granting humanity emergency authority in existential crises. They sent their children to study on Earth, hoping to understand what made humans so determined, so recklessly brave, so impossibly stubborn. But the real change happened quietly, in the hearts of billions of beings across the galaxy. They'd seen what the humans did. They'd watched the youngest species face down cosmic horror with nothing but courage and creativity. And they began to ask themselves questions they hadn't considered in 12,000 years. What had they lost in those of peace? What had their ancestors known that they'd forgotten? What would they be willing to sacrifice for others? Some concordant species began to follow human ships, not as observers but as students. They wanted to learn how humans thought, how they approached problems, how they could look at impossible odds and still try anyway. They wanted to relearn what it meant to be alive, to be vital, to be willing to risk everything for something greater than themselves. Humanity, meanwhile, returned to exploring the cosmos. They were quieter now, more thoughtful. They'd learned the cost of their curiosity and the weight of their victories. But they were still human, still asking questions, still pushing boundaries, still treating every mystery as something to be solved rather than feared. And across the galaxy, for the first time in 12,000 years, other species began to follow their example. The age of hiding and hopping was over. A new age was beginning, one where courage mattered as much as wisdom, where youth could teach elders, where the impossible was just another problem waiting to be solved. The Void Devourer was gone, but its legacy remained, not in destruction, but in the lesson it taught. Sometimes, the youngest and weakest can teach the oldest and strongest what it truly means to live. Sarah stood on the observation deck of a new research vessel, watching Earth turn below her. She was older now, gray in her hair, but her eyes were still bright with wonder. Somewhere out there, the universe held mysteries beyond counting. Somewhere out there, other impossibilities waited to be faced. She smiled and turned to her crew. "All right," she said, "let's see what else is out there." And humanity flew on into the darkness, carrying the light of hope with them, teaching the galaxy that no problem was truly unsolvable, and that sometimes, being young and reckless and human was exactly what the universe needed.